They brought dump trucks to my driveway like they were coming to a barbecue. Only nobody invited me, and the party was supposed to be my grandfather's bridge built in 1897. The kind of thing you don't insult unless you like watching physics hand out unpaid lessons. And that morning, the HOA president clapped her hands and said, "Watch this unsafe junk crumble," as if the whole thing were a performance art piece and not somebody's family history. If you want a good hook, there it is: three diesel monsters, a woman in a hard hat who thinks paperwork is a hammer and a stone arch that's been stubbornly polite for 127 years, and you should have seen the mist over Willow Creek, the kind of light that makes old stone look holy, and below it the engines warming up like they were clearing their throats for demolition. I'm 52. Retired civil engineer, spent 30 years building bridges across mountain passes, bridges meant to laugh at convoys and weather and time, and now here I was defending a 12-foot span my grandfather cut stone by stone because a neighborhood bully decided historic was an eyesore and development money smelled better than ethics. Act 1, the spark. It started with a white Lexus and a clipboard, Linda Piton, HOA president and professional officiousness, wearing a smile like a contract killer wearing pearls, telling me my bridge was a hazard, then handing me a violation notice on paper thick enough to bruise. $500 fine, daily penalties, and a bureaucratic litany that read like a script from someone who had learned influence in networking brunches and forgotten what it meant to build something honest. She talked about safety, property values, visual coherence, all the words polite people use to justify ugly things. But the question that stuck was the one Eleanor posed quietly later. Why would she order load-bearing certifications unless she planned to test them herself? The answer came fast. A convoy of dump trucks, a concrete mixer, a crane, a permit that smelled faintly of urgency and special favors, and a plan that was uglier than a foreclosure notice. The first county inspector fell in love with the craftsmanship, Dale Morrison, old-school hands that knew stone, and his report said the bridge exceeded modern safety standards, recommended preservation rather than modification, which should have been the end of it. Instead, Linda went nuclear digging permits, hiring heavy equipment and turning a little creek crossing into a theater of intimidation. Act 2. The pushback and the twist. At first I thought it would be legal wrangling paperwork for paperwork until I found the paperwork that mattered. Eleanor showed up with a manila folder like a prosecutor with a conscience. And inside were bank statements, contractor invoices, HOA meeting minutes, a paper trail that smelled like corruption, not safety. Special assessments that paid contractors who did nothing, payments to companies with names that echoed each other like bad actors in a scam, and buried in the ledger a monthly $1,500 payment from Consolidated Development Corporation CDC to Linda. That changed the story. This wasn't a safety crusade. It was land-clearing systematic pressure on elderly homeowners' fines that bled people into selling properties scooped up for a creekside retail complex that would need my bridge removed to pass environmental review, and Linda, it turned out, had bought CDC stock. She'd bet on the project, and the HOA's muscle was the ticket to payday. Once the motive shows itself, strategy gets clearer. I didn't want revenge, never wanted blood on the stone my grandfather set. I wanted the truth exposed and the bridge left alone. So I did what my training taught me: analyze the problem, quantify the variables, and let natural forces do their work. The bridge was built on bedrock. The approach roads, Linda's own HOA's work, were built on filled creek bottom clay and sand, cheap and optimistic. Saturated clay loses load-bearing capacity like a person loses patience with a liar, fast and inevitable. I called in favors the right way. County engineers, environmental officers, a local reporter who liked human stories wrapped in technical irony, and set up cameras, documentation, and a chain of custody for evidence. I did nothing illegal. I just nudged water management, documented soil testing, doing routine creek maintenance that in context would push the ground to its honest performance. Physics doesn't lie. People do. And then came the twist that turned a nasty HOA fight into something cinematic. Linda wasn't just vindictive, she was financially tangled with the developer who stood to gain more than a curb appeal upgrade. She stood to make a fortune if my 3 acres went away, and she'd use the HOA as a tool to clear dissenters. Her emergency demolition permit wasn't about public safety. It was about timelines and profit. When you realize the villain is both corrupt and desperate, you stop being outraged and start being methodical. Act 3, the payoff. The first day of her tests was a comedy of errors. An 80,000-pound dump truck slid halfway across the approach and then stopped, Not because the bridge failed, but because the road itself started to fail, asphalt spiderwebbing and heaving, as if the earth were shrugging off a bad decision. By the time the county inspector and Channel 7 arrived, the operation looked less like an inspection and more like an episode of Natural Justice live-streamed. Linda escalated. She brought military surplus monsters, a demolition crane, a concrete pumper, and eventually, in a move that made my hair stand up, she climbed into the cab of a concrete truck herself and tried to operate equipment that takes years to learn in front of officials and cameras and a man who'd built bridges for a living. Predictably, physics patient, impartial physics took over. The concrete pumper shoved forward toward the approach's weakest point, and the road just gave up a theatrical slow-motion collapse of human hubris. The truck sank nose first into the creek bed like a banker into a scandal. Linda abandoned ship, got handcuffed on site for reckless endangerment and embezzlement, and the local news ran a headline that was mercilessly precise. HOA president's demolition attempt collapses literally, and the internet made it into a meme before lunchtime. Justice felt sweet, yes, but quieter than I expected. CDC's project collapsed under its own permit violations and environmental red tape. Linda's house ended in foreclosure to pay restitution. The HOA got a new board with actual oversight. And my bridge, the stubborn little arch that outlasted fashion and greed, ended up the beneficiary of county grants and community love. The aftermath, repair, renaissance, and a lesson. We restored the stonework, not because we had to, but because it deserved it. Interpretive signs, explaining 19th century techniques, a creek restoration that brought life back to fish and wildflowers, and an annual Stonebridge Days that made the place a gathering instead of a battleground. We started a scholarship in my wife's name for students studying preservation and sustainable engineering. Funny how a viral video and a ruined concrete truck can seed education. But the real lesson wasn't in courthouse filings or bank balances. It was quieter, the difference between authority and competence. Linda had authority, she'd built it through networking and paperwork, but she had no competence when it came to the realities of soil and water and structure and competence matters when consequences are physical and not just reputational. The bridge taught me that sometimes the thing built with patience and knowledge will outlast the thing built with shortcuts and ambition. The moral arrived as a small, sharp epiphany. Not a sermon, just a moment sitting on the bridge. One calm morning with creek mist on my boots that justice isn't always loud and karma isn't always theatrical. But when you stack arrogance against actual expertise, reality tends to tip the scales. It also made me think about the unequal playfield. I could push back because I'd spent a career learning how things bear weight, but most people don't have that. How many people lose ground because they lack expertise? The loud people can't be bothered to respect. 6 months later, Linda's concrete truck was hauled out the creek, smelled like mint again, and my mailbox was still the wrong color if you asked the old rules, which nobody did anymore. The community was quieter, kinder, a little more suspicious of sudden permits, a little more loving of what survived. If you watch the footage, and you can find it if you care to look, it's satisfying in that pure, small way. The bridge stands, the road is a hazard. The trucks are stuck, and the person who tried to weaponize bureaucracy is the one who pays. It feels like a tidy ending, a courtroom drama where the evidence is mostly gravity and a well-placed county inspector. But it also raises a harder question that eats at me on quiet nights. How many Lindas are out there using rules as tools to strip communities, and how many ordinary people don't have the training or the luck to make their physics lesson public? So here's the part where you come in, because this story isn't mine to hoard. Did the outcome feel like justice to you, or just lucky timing, and a man with an engineering degree? Have you ever been bullied by an HOA, a neighbor, or a system that pretends to enforce fairness while auctioning off the neighborhood to the highest bidder? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me if you think rules are fair when enforced unevenly, or if you think the law is a blunt instrument that sometimes needs a little technical competence to wield correctly. If this made you smile at physics getting its revenge, share it with someone who needs to see that patience and knowledge can beat noise and shortcuts. And if you have your own HOA horror story or a small victory against someone who thinks rules are a club, tell us below. Who deserves more power, the loudest voice or the person who actually knows what they're doing?
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.